Welcome to Lesson 5 of BIB 221, The Relational God. This week, we're going to talk about the Eternal Covenant, which is the first of 8 divine covenants that we'll be studying the rest of this course. After this lesson, you should be able to, 1, situate the Eternal Covenant within the biblical meta-narrative of creation, fall, redemption, new creation. Secondly, you'll be able to identify the 3 parts of the eternal covenant, the words, the blood, and the sign or seal of the covenant. Thirdly, I'm also going to introduce you to a new concept that is connected to these divine covenants in Scripture, and that is the dispensation of the covenant. So we'll talk about that. And then lastly, we're going to bring in some systematic theology in this discussion. And we're going to talk about how there are 3 different theological systems that attempt to describe the way that these covenants fit together to unfold the story of the Bible. So let's get into it.
In Module 1, I shared a video with you on Psalm 90, and in that video, I showed you a graphic that contains a paradigmatic way of understanding all of reality. I want to reproduce that graphic here by way of review and also by way of introducing the Eternal Covenant. In Psalm 90, verse 2, Moses wrote, "From everlasting to everlasting, you are God." Or another way we could say it is, "From eternity past to eternity future, you are God." And in between eternity past and eternity future is time, or at least time as we know it and experience it today. Now, if we took the time to read the entire psalm, we would see that God does 2 things in time. Namely, He has created everything that exists other than Himself, and He's redeeming that creation, which has fallen due to sin. So we can put all this together into a single statement that describes all of reality. And it goes like this. Time is a fragment of eternity in which God is working out His purposes concerning creation and redemption. This is a very important concept that is fundamental to having a biblical worldview. And as such, it's worth committing to memory. So if you're able, repeat it out loud along with me as I read it again. Time is a fragment of eternity in which God works out His purposes concerning creation and redemption. And what we can do with those 2 purposes of God in time is expand them out into the 4-part biblical meta-narrative. In the beginning, God creates all things. But then something terrible happens, and God's good creation becomes corrupted through the fall. So God sets out to put right what has been put wrong by sin, and we call this redemption. Ultimately, God is going to restore all things in a new heavens and a new earth, a whole new creation. In the next part of the video, we'll relate this paradigm and the biblical meta-narrative to the divine covenants of Scripture. So what you're seeing now on the screen is a blank version of a document that I have titled Covenants Chart. And you can find this in Module 3 under Materials Needed for Success. You're going to need to download it and print it out. It'll be an assignment that you turn in at the end of the term. But you're going to engage with it as you watch every lesson video from here on out. The idea is that as you watch each video, you'll be given information that is necessary to fill in all the blanks on this chart. And as you fill it in, you'll see how each one of the covenants fits into the biblical meta-narrative and carries the story of the Bible forward from Genesis to Revelation. So just to get us started, we'll begin by filling in the 5 boxes toward the top of the chart. The very top box in the center of the chart should have the word eternity in it. And hopefully you can see how this chart relates to the graphic that we previously had on the screen. If you look to the far left, and to the far right, you can see that we have the same framework as the previous graphic, from everlasting to everlasting. And everything in between those represents time from the last graphic. Remember, time is a fragment of eternity in which God is working out His purposes concerning creation and redemption. But we've split those two things out into 4 movements. So, in those 4 boxes, between everlasting and everlasting, you need to write the words creation in the first box, fall in the second, then redemption, and lastly, new creation. The rest of the blanks on the chart correspond to the 8 covenants we're going to study. And if you listen carefully to the videos, you'll hear everything you need to fill in those blanks. Where you see a blank followed by the word covenant, you'll write in the name of a specific covenant. Then right underneath that, where it says covenant of, this is where you'll write in the dispensation of each covenant. And I'm going to introduce you to the idea of dispensation in part 2 of lesson 5. Next, just below the dispensation, you're going to put a biblical reference, chapter and verse, where each covenant can be found in Scripture. And then lastly, some of the covenants have attached to them what I call a messianic seed promise. And as we get to those covenants, I'll point out to you and explain what I mean by that. So with all that in mind, I hope you can see that as we fill in all the details of these covenants, how we'll be able to trace the development of the biblical meta-narrative from creation to new creation. All right, well, we're ready now to get into the first of the 8 covenants. So in the next video, part 2 of lesson 5, we'll start with the eternal covenant.